question and answer session that follows the Eyes of the Town. And we've had a few questions coming in, which I think will put our panel under a bit of pressure, as Jack Charlton would have said, I think. The first question, there are actually two linked questions from Alan Moore. The first one is that given that Clonmel Borough Council is in the process of commissioning a design team for an urban realm project to rejuvenate the town centre, what advice would the panel offer to the consultants in the light of what you've been saying this morning? Orla, can I ask you first to respond to that?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So that's a really exciting time, obviously, for Clonmel. To commission a public realm plan is really important because it has the potential to set out short-term, medium and long-term goals for the public spaces of the town. I mean, I think a lot of public realm plans have been completed in Ireland in the last number of years, which is really great, is really encouraging to see. And we're starting to see that bearing fruits in terms of the implementation of those plans gradually across the country. The really successful ones, I think, have demonstrated a couple of things. Firstly, that they have used multidisciplinary design teams to really try to understand the towns before they produce a design. So understanding the town in terms of its mobility, in terms of what makes it tick, what makes it unique. And to understand the unique character of the town, you've really got to both map it on the ground, but you've got to talk to the people of the town who know their towns better than anybody. So I would say, firstly, the first port of call is to engage with the people of the town. So not to come with a prepared idea, but to actually really openly engage and listen to the people of the town to try to understand their experience of Clonmel and how the public spaces work already, and what then might need to be done. And then secondly, the other very, very important thing is to try to control the car and to place pedestrians in the hierarchy above the car in terms of any new design changes. So controlling the car means controlling car parking. It means controlling how much space cars have access to, the speed of cars, so that everybody can have the freedom to walk around the town. And that goes from older people to people with buggies to teenagers, so that everybody feels that they can firstly walk about in their town and that they can stop and pause and sit in places in their town. And that means that you've got good footpaths, good streetscapes, good public spaces that firstly give priority to people on their feet and on their bikes and with buggies or wheelchairs or whatever, and that the car is then subservient to that. And where we've seen that successfully implemented in, for example, towns like Clonakilty and Westport, it's added hugely to the town. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. And I think, Noel, would you have some advice you'd like to offer?
Yeah, well, I think, every town has a story. And the people of that area are the ones that shape that story. I'd agree a lot of what Orla said. In any public consultation, and I've been involved in various ones in education, the vested interests, the high stakeholders will be no bother get engagement from them. They have a vested interest engagement. So the commercial end of it, the developers, all of those will willingly engage and so on. But what you want is the ordinary people. It's our town. And how do you get that engagement? That would be the challenge. And I think I think the people of Clonmel, in their commentary that I've been listening to, know their town is in decline. They can see the shut shops, they can see the abandoned upper spaces over the shops. And those that have lived here longer than I have memories of the streets being bustling with life and people living overhead. I think there's only one family now living on the main street, O'Connell Street. Contrast that with 50, 60 years ago. Be an interesting piece of research to do, but it was much more. So people have, the public in Clonmel have very little experience, apart from older people, of living in the town. And yet, as I listen to people who have reared their families and so on, who would like maybe to downsize, but you need to say, what type of a town would you like to move into? What are the things you would require? And I was interested in Lachlan earlier on. You made the point, this is connected to climate just as much as everything else. I was up in Rathcoffey last Sunday. My daughter took me out to see a little place there where they've set up a community garden. And I was talking to some of the locals. It's a small housing estate, but they said that garden has brought people together, that green space. And it was intergenerational. That's what I was fascinated with. There was young and old and teenagers there. So people, to make it attractive to come into town, it is not attractive to consider living in Clonmel at the moment, in the centre of it. If you're an older person, you have to travel too far for facilities. So it's how to engage the ordinary person. It's having the heart, at the heart of it, music, culture, trade as well, of course, the coffee shops, good dining spaces, and socially connecting spots. There is no place, if you meet somebody on the street and want to sit down and have a chat, there is no place to sit. There is no seating spaces, public seating spaces on our street.
Can I join in on that?
Yeah, please do.
Because my research has been about public space, and just sometimes people confuse the commissioning of the public realm with things like the bricks, the bollards and the bins. And really what's most important is the idea of choice for people to make space habitable. So I would suggest that one thing to do is to not pay for sudden and expensive hard landscape, but to do soft things. So in New York, you probably see they're using a can of paint. They're trying things out, get people to respond. So it's called tactical urbanism rather than capital payment. I think that's really, really important. And Noah's point about seats, I have measured how many seats are in Irish towns, very few, and they're often only at the bus stop. And yet the thing which most people want to do is to linger and loiter. And the longer you hang out in a space, the more economic growth. Copenhagen has shown that. So I'd almost say, stop your commissioning right now, do things slowly, and then get a response. This has been happening for about 200 years. Yeah. Okay, so I wonder if I'll leave it there, but that's, don't pay for it all at once. Make sure you test it.
Okay, well, it's interesting that you said that, Miriam, because it actually connects in with a supplementary question that Alan also asked, saying, what practical measures could you introduce, to persuade people to live in towns? It's a good question,
They're very connected, I think, Lachlan, the two questions, because going back to Noel's point, the first thing you have to do is to ask the people of the town, what they require to live in the center of their town, like what's missing at the moment that they feel that they don't have, that if it was provided would persuade them to live in the town. So do they need space, private open space, as well as good public space? So that might mean exploring the depth of urban blocks to make sure that there is good gardens, for example, to get some outdoor or private space. There might be access from the back of a block so they can park their car off the street. And then the street itself, where you open your front door onto, is that a pleasant experience? Can you let your kids out the front door to walk to school? Because you should be able to. At the town, that's the beauty of it. It's compact. And I can see in Westport, the Greenway and the pedestrian connectivity, the positive impact that has had on the town in terms of a place to live has been just unbelievable. All the schools are connected along the Greenway, so kids can actually just go to school wherever they live. Off-road, and they're safe from cars. You can basically open your door and your kids can head off to school or into town. And for them to have that freedom it's really special, and it knits them back into the fabric of the town. And they're passively surveyed. People in the town can keep an eye on kids as they move around. For older people, it means that they can more easily and more safely get to all the services they need. So it works for everybody. But I do think there is something missing. We also probably need some financial incentives to make it a little bit easier. It has to be at least as financially achievable as to build a house in a greenfield site out of town, if it's to be realistically viable for people to take on living back in the town. So, if there's a cheaper option that's quicker, of course people are going to do that, because, it's such a big thing to buy a house. So we've got to tackle it on a number of fronts, from the public realm, private space, financial incentives, and then support to bring people through the regulatory framework. Because if you're taking on refurbishing a property and bring it up to good energy standards, you do need support of the local authority to work through that process to make it as easy and as barrier free as possible.
Yeah, we have a couple of different kinds of questions coming in, which I think I'd really like to hear what you think about them, because several comments that have been made so far have been about the importance of connecting with people in the town or who would like to live in town and so on. The question is, what would a good public consultation look like? What do you think are the essential ingredients for a good and effective public consultation? Would anybody like to respond to that one? Silence.
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
Yes, Miriam, yes.
I'll just pick up on the last point I was making. It's incredible how many towns in other countries have done this really well. So in a way, let's say it's out there, it's known already. The issue of just using chalk and changing a place, and you've seen children do this on streets all the time through this last few months, that adds remarkably to a place. So that you doing small changes incrementally and building upon them is the best way. I would almost always say, do it slowly, have a plan for 30 years and chip away at it, but have a long-term goal about quality. The worst thing is when people go in, pay a lot of money on paving and get it completely wrong for people. So that's kind of saying participation is a slow process. So begin and plan slowly, and it will build a constituent if you listen on the first few days of the first intervention.
I think as well, we've had a traditional idea in Ireland of consultation being a kind of a box ticking exercise where we say we've presented an idea and we've looked for consultation. And as Noel pointed out, there are people who have vested interests who will make their voice heard very clearly. But engagement is slightly different. It's more, it needs to be deeper. You need to get to the people maybe whose voices aren't heard so much, or who would feel maybe reticent about turning up at a public workshop. So you've got to use different means. You've got to be a bit agile. And I think Miriam's point about tactical urbanism is really important, because you can use the town itself as a laboratory to test and to ask people how they find the small changes before you invest in the longer term goal. And then when you do that, it should use the very best possible materials that you can. And so what you do, you make sure that it's the right thing to do first, and you try to bring everybody along in a slow, incremental, engaged process.
Well, one of the groups, I think, that tends to be somewhat outside the loop, should we say, and they've already been part of this conversation, but they connect with another question that's been asked here about young people in particular in the town, and whether the requirements of young people, how can they be brought on board? How can they be reconciled with I suppose, the tensions that groups of young people tend to cause among, say, certain other groups of people? Is this part of the question? If that when you have a public consultation process, depending on the method, you tend to filter out different groups, almost, unless it's part and parcel of the way that you actually deal with people on an ongoing basis, people get left out of the process. I'm wondering, really, I suppose the thing that has occurred to me from other contexts is that there are other groups that get marginalized quite quickly, like new arrivals in a town, for example. You know, if you have people that are coming in from other countries, for example, we're seeing more and more of now and will see more in the future. At what point do their voices get heard? You know, so it's an ongoing question, I think, for public authorities in many spheres as to how you can connect, how you can engage. And there's a lot certainly to be gleaned from other people's experience in these matters, I think. But I have another question, which is more, I suppose it would fit this panel very well. It's somebody who says, well, Clonmel has no great public space, you know? And what do you do about that in a situation? The space in front of the main guard, I suppose, is the one which you would expect might be the public space. But, you know, Aisling Kilroy says, I feel strongly about Clonmel not having a central focal point, a gathering place, heart. And I've wondered about the ability of the location and fine space that is the main guard to fulfill that function. What would you think about that?
Well, could I come in there, Lachlan?
Yeah, yes.
When I was getting my students to photograph the buildings, O'Connell Street, Gladstone Street, Mitchell Street, and so on, even a simple thing like taking photographs, they had to be so careful on the streetscape that they didn't step out in front of a car when they were trying to get one. And in a way, we have a focal point, except the focal point has been robbed from us by the cars. The main O'Connell Street, from the West Gate to the main guard, is a fine wide streetscape and some lovely architecture in some of the buildings along. But that is dominated by cars. Even if you look at the use of space on the street, it is cars get most use of it. Pedestrians get the paving only. And I think there's a beautiful, I'd agree with you that as a town, in contrast to Thurles, Cahir and other local towns, we don't have a collection point. There's also that beautiful space from the main guard down towards the river there. Yes. That is totally underutilized, and if buildings were readjusted and so on, there could be a lovely public plaza there. Also across the river we have Sure Island, and it has been talked about for so long, being linked into the town as a green space. I was very interested in what Miriam said about soft landscape. Concrete paving is harsh. I find myself drained if I spend too long on it. You need that green space. And if you go to Italian towns and places like that, you see that plenty of greenery and plenty of collection points. And I'm always fascinated in Spanish and Italian towns, the way the older people gather in a space, and some of them are playing bollards or whatever. There's even space to do that. And you raised the question about young people. As somebody who has had teenagers, I remember the biggest challenge as a parent was there is no social space for them to hang out in. The adults can go to the pub or whatever, to the restaurant, to the coffee shop, teenagers in the budget, but no social space where they can meet and connect. And simple things like roller skate or whatever it may be that young people are into. And that is the problem, to get your ordinary person engaged with the discussion on that. But I know young people would say that they feel excluded from the town. It might be McDonald's or whatever as their gathering point. In my case, when the kids were teenagers, Poppyfield opened here in Clonmel, and KFC was their gathering point. And thankfully, KFC let people, at least I knew they were safe, sitting there. So with the absence of that, but Clonmel does need to address the issue that it doesn't have a public gathering space. And if there is a public gathering space at the main guard, the traffic has to be diverted. Why don't we look at pedestrianisation? I heard somebody mention about Copenhagen. I spent a couple of weeks there last summer, and talk about a city that is people friendly and lends itself as a model. Also, Stony Batter in Dublin was a rundown area. My daughter happened to be renting there for a while, so I got to know it, and I got to know it over a couple of years, and to see how they've rejuvenated themselves as a community. And what I loved about it was, what I love about it now is that it's intergenerational. And I keep going back to this. This town must be intergenerational in terms of attracting people back in to live. And if you look at it, probably the people with the most money in Clonmel are people whose families are reared. They have a lot of liquid asset in their houses. They probably have their retirement lump sums and so on. They want to downsize. There is no opportunity, and there is space to do that. My students were shocked at the amount of hidden space in Clonmel that is actually available. And the WIT architect students even highlighted that we don't see from the streetscape. There's whole blocks of space. We're not short of space inside in the town, but it's blocked off, underutilized. There's a lovely public plaza between Mitchell Street, Gladstone Street, and the Garda station there, totally underutilized, derelict.
Okay,
and are important as well.
We're going to have to wrap it up now, and I'd like to say thank you to everyone. I think there have been very interesting ideas. Mainly, I think the concluding message you could say is that you begin from what you have, from the places that you've got, and from the people that you have, and you work from there. And I would just like to thank you all, to Noel, to Orla, to Sharon, and to Miriam, who persisted with us to the end. Thank you very much indeed. And could we say also thank you to Orla for so graciously hosting our earlier session. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks very much. Take care.